everyone. I am Nupur Kumari, Board Director of Asian Women of Winnipeg and Portfolio Manager at Capgemini. And you are watching You Multicultural channel. Today, my guest is one of a kind woman. She has traveled miles, crossed many seas and oceans as a 9-year-old girl with 2 braids, and stepping onto eastern shores, is now a grandmother of 4, a champion of change, and an executive director at Mood Disorder Association of Manitoba. Please join me in welcoming Rita Chahal to You Multicultural channel show, where we'll be talking today about mental health issues in women in leadership and in general. It's so wonderful to have you here, Rita.
Thank you for this lovely introduction and for the invitation. It's my pleasure and privilege to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for doing that with us. So, I would like to start with the beginning. I mean, as a child, right, 9-year-old girl, leaving behind your friends, especially your grandparents, stepping onto foreign lands and adapting to new culture. How it was living in those times as a migrant, as a child in PEI?
Great question to start with. Yes, our family migrated to Canada in 1966, and we were the second family of Indian origin to land in Prince Edward Island. We actually, landed at Pier 21, but I have to say that it was an experience. I mean, while my family came from northern India, and while I was familiar with snow, seeing so much of it all over the place was a bit of a culture shock, and so those are some of the initial experiences that we had. When we landed in Halifax, we had to go to Prince Edward Island, which is where we were headed for, and we had to take this train, and the train had to cross an ocean.
Yes.
And then the train went into a big boat, was the ferry. And those kind of things, that's an incredible experience. You never knew that a train could actually go into a boat. And as a nine-year-old, that was just quite the experience. First of all, of seeing so much snow, and then all of a sudden, these things happening. But you know what? You mentioned leaving a home and coming to a new country. That has its own trauma. And for me, it was traumatic at the time because I was very close to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. And I did not want to leave. I told my parents, you can go, but I'm going to stay with Amma, my nanny. Yeah. And I called, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried, and did, even at the beginning when I first arrived. But as a child, there's also the excitement of newness. And so, and children do adapt easily, and so we did.
And I love that you mentioned, I mean, these are the terms we use, Dadi, Nani, and Amma, for our grandparents, especially grandmothers, and I still miss my grandmother too. So, yeah, I want to talk about a couple of things around that. So, as a child, yes, we see opportunity all the time. There is so much to see. Even snow makes us happier as a child. And I do share that cultural heritage as an Asian woman with you, and I know in our culture, talking about mental health and depression is still kind of stigma.
Yes, very much.
So, in those times, I'm curious to know, was there any awareness of impact of this migration on mental health? Yeah. Did anyone talk about it?
You're absolutely right on the mark, Nuparji. It was not something talked about. It wasn't even something that was talked about in mainstream, actually. And there was a personal experience that I can share with you because I have my mother's permission to do so. And she was a young woman in her late 20s and still of childbearing age. And so when my brother was born, she went into postpartum depression. But nobody knew about it. No, we couldn't understand. My father didn't understand, and we didn't know what was going on. And so those are things that you never talked about. But she was too afraid to talk about it to anybody else. She had no idea. So that was probably one of my first experiences of dealing with mental health when my mom, went into postpartum. She was hospitalized. as a result of it.
That's so
And that was
sad.
traumatic for us as children. It was very hard on my father, who was, working at the time and trying to keep the family together. I also ended up I was gone for university at that time. And so going back and forth to see my mom and going home and attending university, those were all challenging times. But I didn't know that these were mental health, and it was not something you did talk about. And we didn't even tell our families back home that what my mom was going through.
And I can imagine that would have been very traumatic. I mean, even today we don't talk about those terms. I mean, leave the medication part of it. So do you feel that that experience have instilled you to become a champion of mental health in some way and form?
I think it's one of the area, things that might have helped me. I now recognize how important it was for us to have known about this, to have talked about it, and not to have pushed it underneath. I think that and of course, there's been other experiences along the way. We all have family members who might be experiencing mental health challenges. And one of the other guests that's been on these shows have talked about addictions. So many of our families, have experienced. So now it's a much more open discussion. I am certainly someone who promotes the need to talk about it more openly. My father also experienced mental health. He was a very high achiever in university and in his career, and then later on in life experienced some mental health, including later in stage dementia. So these are all things that at that time we had no knowledge of, but now I'm one of the people that I in my family who really tries to help my family understand that these are things that cannot be treated as taboos, but these are conversations to be had and understood as to why people might be experiencing and how can we help, how can we support as a family and get the help that we need.
Yeah, and you rightly mentioned, I mean, this just doesn't stop at that level. It goes to the level of dementia, and just having the awareness of it make a huge difference. So yeah, so I want to talk about more on this migration aspect. I mean, if you see today's world, there is a bit of population stabilization is happening. The more dense populated areas are now migrating more to the sparsely populated regions. And one of the example is the country where we are sitting in, which is seeing the huge influx of immigrant. And especially no matter, I mean, and that I'm talking about, or through my personal experience traveling over 25 countries, that no matter how well prepared you are for a migration, there is always a cultural shock, and that gets added, when there is a cold weather in Manitoba, when you do not have those close-knit communities the way we have seen back home. So what would be your advice to the young migrants?
I can only share from my lived experience. I can only share from that perspective. I'm not a healthcare professional to speak up, to give them any medical or professional advice as such. But based on my shared experience, I would say certainly before you come here, you should know about what the country holds, what are some of the things, and with globalization and with internet and with access to technology, that's much easier to do now than back in the 60s. It was something that we are much more, it's more available to us. But certainly find out about the communities that you're going to be in. See if you can make connections ahead of time. See if you know what some of the resources that are available. There are some great agencies in Manitoba and across the country that can provide support when you do come here. So be aware of them. And I guess the bottom line message of that is, don't be afraid to ask for help. If you need it, ask for it. I mean, there are good people out there who are willing to help you if you only ask. And I guess underlying that is the fact that your vulnerability is your greatest strength. Having the courage ask. Sometimes what happens, whether you're struggling with a mental health condition or physical or some other struggle, financial or otherwise, people are really afraid, especially in our ethnocultural communities, where they say it's a shame for them not to ask for help. And I say, there's no shame in asking for help. Absolutely none.
And it's a good point that you mentioned about the community, right? I mean, even today, as a board director of Asian Women of Winnipeg, I see that this is one of the strongest platforms which women or even the other Asian and non-Asian communities could leverage to just come out of the homes. I guess our previous guest, she did mention that sometimes it's a very basic things that we need to change, like coming out, mingling with the community members, that could help us in so many such issues.
It's really important to have that social network and those support systems that allow you to, because often you're coming here alone or with just your family, and all your extended family is still back home. You don't have those opportunities to seek, and you've lost. There has been loss. And there's a grieving process that you go through when there is that loss. So being able to, count on the support of others, organizations like AWOW and other community organizations. We have a number of them certainly in the East Indian community. To be able to seek out that support, the socialization aspect is very important, but also good information and resources. Be able to also access mainstream organizations, mainstream support. That would be some of the things that I would advise people to think about.
We did talk about how as a child you coped up with the migration and then moving on to the migration. And now if I, move forward in your journey, you are an adult woman who is leading many, leadership positions, including executive director at MDM, or your past executive positions at MIAC or at Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, and you have also, a glorious 42 years of career spanning across academics, corporate, and community work. So now I want to talk about that in those leading positions, what are the common problems that you see women are facing?
Great question, actually. I like the way you set that up. Well, first of all, let me just go back to when we first arrived in Canada and as starting school, things like that. I have to say that I was very fortunate that I came from India with a background of having studied in public school. So my English was really, really good. In fact, sometimes people have joked that said that I spoke the King James version of English, right? So, and then I was brought up in a very British school, so I had a lot of good basic knowledge about adapting and familiarity with the church, which was a very big part. Our spiritual growth was very important at that time. So those were all things that really helped the adaptation for me as a child. Moving on, as you said, I've been very fortunate to have had an extremely blessed career with the support of many. I didn't do it by myself. I did it with a lot of help and support and guidance and mentoring from many women in our community. And men as well, who saw potential and were willing to take chances and as part of selection committees and things like that allowed me to excel in the leadership roles that I've had the privilege of holding. What I found as time grew on and I experienced is that there aren't necessarily the supports in place for women who are in leadership roles, if they're struggling themselves, to be able to ask for help. The corporate sector is all about making a profit, right? The not-for-profit sector, which majority of 25 years or so of that has been in part of my journey, is all about people. So when you're in these leadership roles, whether it's corporate or whether it's a not-for-profit sector, you are leading people, you're responsible for them. You have to be able to your head is the one that's going to turn.
Yeah, and you don't want to be
and
shown.
you don't want to show your vulnerability.
Exactly.
Because you're so many people are relying on you.
That's
so,
one of the very important
and
aspects.
so you always have to have almost a perma smile. You have to be camera ready, as I would say.
Heads up,
yeah,
all
constant,
good.
you know, and you sometimes could be just, you might have something really traumatic happening at home, but you have to deal with what's in front of you. I've run into those situations many times, especially when I'm in front of the camera. That there were times when that happened. And if I may, and I'm quite willing to do that, to share a personal experience. When COVID hit a few years ago, and we all know the impact it's had, I too, like many others, experienced a job loss. And the grieving that went with that, and on all of this, the shock that went with that, and that stage in my life, and having achieved a fairly senior, prominent role in our community and recognition,
And
it was very hard for me.
When you are a high achiever, you never imagined losing a job. I mean,
so and I wasn't the only one. There were many others as well. And I just thought, I'm never going to get out of this. I am going to just wither away, and no one's going to even figure out what happened to me. So there were lots of different thoughts. And I just went into a cave, literally, like myself, and for 6 weeks or so did not want to get out of bed, didn't want to do anything. But then there was something in me that kept saying, you have lots to give still. You can't just let go of all of this. You've got to get back up again.
And I remember on that, I mean, even the first lady like Michelle Obama came out and said, yes, there is some form of clinical depression that's happening.
Yes,
and
that
empowered
you had
all
to fight
of us.
it. And because you're as a leader, you're taught, you learn that you have to build that strength. You have to, now you're not just leading other people, but you now have to fight for yourself. So I had to do that.
So I want to stop you on that, because that's a very interesting point, I guess. So how did you fight?
How did I fight it?
And again, same thing. I want to know about the informal ways and also the formal ways through which women in leadership could leverage those tools and techniques.
Well, okay, I'll tackle the way I did it. First of all, I realized that I'm not going to accept this. I'm better. I can do this for myself. I have to take care. I can't rely on other people taking care of me. I have to take care of myself. So that acceptance that I was in a dark place was perhaps the first step. So that demonstration of my vulnerability to myself was important. What I did was when I looked for help, there wasn't a lot of help for women in leadership roles. What I discovered, that others perhaps were experiencing the same things that I might have had when I talked informally to many other women leaders.
Just hiding it.
But you know what? Just
let's put it under the rug.
And there were also comments made to me, people not understanding where I was, and sometimes it was other women who said, oh, don't worry, you'll find another job. But they didn't realize that what I was experiencing. So what I did do was I built a support system for myself. I made sure I had the right people around me, besides my family, my mother, my sister, my children, and so my immediate family. I needed to build a support system outside. So I think there was about 5 women that I specifically chose. And I said, I need you to be my support system. I need you to check in on me. I need you to help guide me. I need you to make sure.
And that was so brave of you.
That was, I commend myself for doing that.
2 things, I guess, on that. One, when you are in leading position, you always see the risk that opening up about mental health could be detrimental to your career. And second, in society also, and especially the heritage which we share, you don't want to see as a mentally ill person. I mean, because those are the labels people put. But I guess you broke both the barriers. You never cared about how it is being
yeah, I did seek
called
medical.
out.
I did seek medical attention. I kept regular appointments. But what I did was I created a routine for myself. I made sure that the support system that I had was there if I needed them, and that they would regularly check in on me. I made sure that I created the routine so I got out of bed, stopped just staying in my pajamas all day. I got dressed up every day the way I would normally have gotten dressed if I was going to work. I sat at my desk. My husband set me up in a home office, and I did job search. 3 hours a day, I looked for work or whatever I needed to do, whether it was having an interview or whether it was job search. I made sure I took regular breaks for myself. So at 10:30 every day, I would listen to the Prime Minister talk about what was going on in the world. I made sure I started to eat well. That took a bit of time because I had stopped eating, and I started to make sure that I had breakfast, made sure I had lunch. I tried to exercise. I'm still working on that one. I'm not quite there yet. But I started to do things but I also took time to just do something for myself, like, something restful that would rest my mind and just not have it. And I watched all the Hallmark movies that have ever been made.
And that's one of the inspiring story. So I want to tell first all of our viewers that Rita Chahal is also the executive director of Mood Disorder Association of Manitoba, and this organization basically support, educate, and also advocate helping any person who is dealing with mental illness. But what particularly I liked about this organization is that they say that we are helping people to help themselves.
Yes.
So I want to touch base on some of those aspects. Yes, I got your journey and how socialization, how the acceptance and the trust helped you getting out of that. But sometimes situations go beyond that. Sometimes people do not feel anyone to put trust into.
Yes.
So what are some of the formal techniques or even maybe the government schemes through MDM that anyone with such kind of experience could leverage?
It's a good question. First of all, Mood Disorder Association of Manitoba, we affectionately refer to ourselves as MDAM, is a non-clinical support organization. So we don't provide clinical intervention. We provide, our service model is based on peer support. So what that means is many of the people who work, whether it's the board members, volunteers, staff, have lived or shared experience. So they can take their experiences and be able to provide that support, that listening, that friendly opportunity for someone to be able to say, oh, I'm not the only one who's going through it, others have too. So that's the one thing that is the underlying basis of what we do. We are a provincial organization, so we have a lot of groups. The post-COVID, the big ones that we are seeing in terms of mental health challenges that people are experiencing are anxiety, depression, and in youth it's suicide ideation, body image, cultural adaptation. These are some of the things that we're seeing in the youth that come to us to see us. So we provide peer support. We have groups that you can go onto our website and find out all the things. But one of the areas that I found missing, and because it was from my own experience, is what supports for women in senior leadership roles. They weren't really, we talked about general public. So we have a great women's program supported by Shoppers Drug Mart. And one of the things that I've started in that is a women's speaker series, which allows women who are willing to share their journey of mental health and empower others to talk about the importance of sharing that information.
That's a great initiative.
So, we started out very small, but I eventually built into it that women who were leading organizations in Manitoba are now part of those series. And so we've made it, we've tried to normalize the need to talk about mental health at any level. Mental health, just like any other, like domestic violence, doesn't see, socioeconomic the silos that we are in. It could happen to anyone. It's happened to me, it's happened to members of my family, it's happened to friends, it's happened to coworkers. The one thing I have to say is that that post-COVID, we all know that mental health is still very stigmatized in mainstream as well as, and most definitely in ethnoculture. But the conversations about mental health have begun.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very encouraging. And organizations like AWOW, individuals like you and I, schools, legislative decision makers, if we can keep those conversations going, the media, to shed light on such an important topic, because without good mental health, we cannot have anything. If we're not just like if we don't have good physical health, everything else. If we don't have the basics in life, if we don't have food and shelter,
and I want to touch on that. So, first of all, I must appreciate your efforts have made many women in leading position to talk openly about that, and same for both of us that we are doing this series here. So, we never shy away talking about having cold symptoms or having flu. But obviously there is a stigma talking about depression or the mental health, and sometimes it gets too late in the game. So I want to know, are there any ways to diagnose it earlier?
Yeah. I think because again, I'll preface that by saying I'm not a physician. I'm not a mental health professional as such. I'm an administrator,
so I recognize. To learn through your journey and your experience.
Anecdotally with you is some of the things I've already talked about.
Yeah.
I think from a clinical perspective, if I think some sadness or you're feeling that this is not normalized, we all live on a continuum of mental wellness and mental illness. Yeah. So all of us every day are in a continuum. So most days you want to be on the mental wellness part of the continuum, but there are moments and experiences and situations and that arise in our day-to-day life, that continuum shifts. If that continuum continues to shift towards the illness for more than 2 weeks, then you need to seek help. You need to find ways in which you can, and at each of those stages, I mean, we can have another session one day, and I can talk about each of those 4 stages of that continuum, which.
But it's good that you mentioned that spectrum from illness to wellness. There are stages,
there's absolute stages.
We could gauge
and some of what are some of the trigger points in each of those stages? How do you cope with for which triggers? What do you do? What are some of the coping mechanisms? I shared some of the things that I did, which are the things that we would advise anyone. Make sure you eat well. Make sure you take care of your physical health. Exercise. Right. Self-care. And self-care is not just bubble baths and chocolates. No. That's not self-care. That's part of it, but it's not the only thing. When people think about self-care, they say, "Oh, go have a bubble bath." Well, that's great. That's one part. But self-care is all the other things. Making sure that meditation is another one that a lot of people do. Self-reflection, gratitude, journal writing. Reading books that are uplifting.
That reminded me of Maslow's theory, where the self-actualization comes right at the top, but it is the essential element. So yeah, I guess through your journey, we really kind of weaved that how we should identify mental health as a child, as a youth, as a women in leadership, and what are some of the information and the resources available to cope up with it. But I want to touch on a few more aspects, especially around Asian women of Winnipeg. Well, I mean, around our organization, but especially for Asian women.
Okay.
So, what I have been seeing on the ground, that many young ladies making Manitoba or in general Canada their home, and in some cases there is a very limited formal education that they are not even aware about what's happening with them. And similar thing I see on the senior adult side of things, which again, you have such an extensive experience that, I could relate you with any of those ages. So, particularly in Asian community, how we should cope up with these things, given there is a stigma, given, there is no awareness. So how we can collaborate through AWOW and through other self-help resources that are available as part of MDM to break this stigma and just
Well,
get out
first
of
of all,
it.
you very correctly identified that it is a stigma. It still continues to be a stigma. What is the silver lining that has happened post-COVID is that the conversations have started. I think the fact that you and I and some of the other guests and the other episodes that you have in this series are talking about this. These are the things that moving forward. When it comes to the young women you're talking about, I think that perhaps it's wishful thinking, perhaps it's a change in these conversations, that women are getting much more aware and shouldn't be afraid to ask for help. They should not be, just like, don't put up with domestic violence, you need to speak up, you need to have a voice. So if you use your voice to ask for help, that's the first step. Your vulnerability is your greatest strength. Have that courage to ask for help. So when I talk to others, when I've done other presentations, I always remind people that it is not a weakness. It in fact is a strength. I think when we are talking about young women coming from other countries and settling in Canada, I think it's important for us to always, as women, but also just as citizens, to always remember where you came from.
Right.
Those parts of your life, you shouldn't just forget them and leave them behind.
Right.
But be grounded in where you are. You now are in a new space. You now have new opportunities. You now have new access to resources. You now have new things to do. And there might be a complete career change. There's lots of new learning. But then also plan for the future. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? How do you want to give back? And I think sometimes as individuals, we tend to forget that giving back is such an important part of the healing process, such an important part of being well-rounded and happy inside. When you can
Right.
give back, that gratitude, is that sort of holistic, that
true.
brings you as a whole.
And I guess on that topic, I want to kind of wrap up this session, which I don't want to. I am absolutely loving and, hearing your stories. So we did talk about mental health, I guess, across the full spectrum of the life and the full spectrum from illness to wellness and what are the various resources. But to wrap up the session, I like this, thing you mentioned about community engagement or community building or giving back. So I always see that nature is also one of the great healer,
yeah.
right? And I have personally seen that traveling across and doing some of the outdoor activities could always help us getting through these things. So give me your last advice to our viewers that how these things could also help support their journey if they are not going in that spectrum.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You've obviously done your research well. It's absolutely important to be engaged in nature, I think. That was one of the things that I incorporated into my journey when I experienced down. I felt like I was being pulled into this tunnel and I was never going to get out of it. And all I could see is this white light at the top, and I just wanted to hold on to it. So it was a light at the top of the tunnel. But part of what I did was making sure I go for walks. I even sometimes watching a video on YouTube about nature, those were very helpful. But talking about it, reading books and things like that. The nature part that you've hit on is really, really important, being in nature. That very first year when I was experiencing this, I spent so much time in my garden. That was the year I had the best garden that I could have had. So I think those are really important pieces of one's journey. But the self-care and self-care beyond bubble baths is really important. So making sure that you eat well, exercise, have a routine, engage in community, ask for help, be social, and not just live within yourself, but really live within the community, live within the family, and start to recognize that there might be others who might be experiencing, and not be ashamed to share your own story. You know, 3 or 4 years ago, when I first came into mood disorders, I might not have shared my story as openly as I do now.
Yeah.
But in seeing others, my courage has come, and now I feel proud that I can do that. And I also want to commend AWOW for the work that they've done in tackling this topic. I know MDAM has worked with AWOW to do a number of sessions, and I would just continue to encourage AWOW and you as board members to keep up that good work and to help people struggling in their journey.
We recently did that run. I mean, I absolutely loved it. We had socialization, we had community building, we did the outdoor activity. So I guess it ticked mark all the check boxes. So thank you so much, Rita, for being on the show today and sharing the insights of mental health so beautifully through your journey. And to my viewers, it doesn't matter where you are in this spectrum from illness to wellness. Socialization, acceptance, and utilizing the resources that are there for you to leverage could help you achieve your well mental being. And if you would like to participate in any of our AWOW events or have some aspiration to give back to the community, reach out to us on www.asianwomenofwinnipeg.com or through our social media channels. And if you want to know about any mental health related resources, reach out to MDAM website. For now, I would like to thank you all for watching us. We'll see you soon.